Sukhdev Saraswat to announce the awards.
The Umang Mathur Memorial Trophy for the Best in Academics Class 11 for 2014-15 goes to Pulkit Agrawal of Madhav House. The Mahil Mishra Memorial Trophy for the Best Sportsman in Class 11 for 2014-15 goes to Shivansh Kalra of Jayaji House. The Maharaja Madhavrao Scindia, the second medal for all-round proficiency in Class 11 for 2014-15 goes to Divyadit Singh of Jayaji House. The Sam Pitroda Award for the Best Innovative Project Producing Standing Sound Waves Using Fire for 2015-16 goes to Atul Korku of Jayappa and Pulkit Agrawal of Madhav House. The R.V. Pawar Medal for scoring the highest percentage of marks in mathematics in Class 12 Board Examination 2014-15 goes to Peter L. of Jayappa House. I would request Ashish Khare to receive the award on his behalf. He couldn't come. The Governor's Medal for scoring the highest percentage of marks in Class 12 Board Examination 2014-15 goes to Anustup Garai of Madhav House. The Field Marshal Karyappa Shield for the Best Sportsman for 2014-15 goes to Harish Kumar of Jayappa House. The Maharaja Jivaji Rao Scindia Medal for all-round proficiency in class 12 for 2014-15 goes to Shishir Garg of Daulat House. I will request his younger brother to receive the prize. Shashank. The Khurshid Lakarwala Junior House Efficiency Shield for 2014-15 goes to Kaner Khed House. The Guru Har Gobind Singh Gurdwara Trophy for the best house in academics for the year 2014-15 goes to Madhav House. The Nepal Trophy for the best house in games and sports for 2014-15 goes to Jayappa House. The General Efficiency Shield for 2014-15 goes to Jayaji House. Now I would request Dr. Shashi Tharoor and President Board of Governors to felicitate Mr. Gopal Chaturvedi for his dedicated and continuous services to the Institute for 10 years. Gopal. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sirs, for giving away the awards. On behalf of the Department of Fine Arts, Kuldeep Amraya and Harshraj Gaur will present memento to our chief guest, Dr. Shashi Tharoor. On behalf of the school, the senior school prefect will present a token of our love to Dr. Shashi Tharoor. May we now request the chief guest, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, to kindly address the gathering.
Good evening, everyone, on this very pleasant evening here. Salutations to my dear friend and parliamentary colleague, Jyotiraditya Scindia, Principal Dr. Madhav Saraswat, members of the Board of Governors, Madhav Awardee Professor Barua, other distinguished guests, teachers, dear students, parents, ladies and gentlemen, friends. I hope that covers everybody. I know it's customary on these occasions to say it's a pleasure to be here, but after what I've seen of the school today, and indeed my all too brief interaction with the students, I can truly affirm that it's indeed a real pleasure to be here at your 118th Founders Day. There are very few schools in India that can boast such a long history and such a magnificent and historic campus in such a splendid setting. I think you're all very lucky to be here. I have to thank my friend Jyotiraditya for his extraordinary introduction. I have to say, it's a kind of introduction that my late father would have been proud of, but only my mother would have believed. And it was also clear that he had taken an enormous amount of trouble to look up all sorts of nuggets about me on the internet. And though I'm often introduced to audiences, he managed to find things that nobody else has been able to unearth while introducing me. I have to say, though, that he was very thoughtful in leaving out all the unpleasant bits. If the least kind thing he could say about me was that I resisted his insistence that I become a badly behaved MP, then I think I've come out of this all right. But you know, that is the habit of good introducers like Jyotiraditya, is that they always like to put a nice gloss on all your deeds and misdeeds. I recall the story of a friend of mine in New York who also used to like to look up speakers on the internet. But unlike Jyotiraditya, he didn't content himself with looking at the speaker's own biodata and accomplishments. He specialized in going up the family tree to the sins of omission and commission of parents and uncles and aunts and so on. So at one point he was going to introduce a speaker, and he found out that this chap had an uncle who had been electrocuted at Sing Sing prison for kidnapping and armed robbery or something equally horrible. But having taken the trouble to look it up, he felt he had to use it. So he said, our distinguished speaker had an uncle who occupied the chair of applied electricity at one of the nation's leading institutions. Which is just my way of saying that all these introductions are always so generous that even your worst sins can be well portrayed. So please do take his kind words with a very large pinch of salt. But let me not ask you to put a pinch of salt in congratulating the prize winners today, whose talents and efforts we have all just recognized. I know there are others who didn't actually see, whom we didn't see on the stage, who've also done remarkably well in school. And I think all of us appreciate their enormous efforts and the efforts put in by the school and the students together to organize this wonderful Founders Day. At today's exhibition, I was greatly impressed by the sheer range of the immense talents on display. I was struck both by the extraordinary gifts and talents amongst the students and by the work of the school in bringing out those talents and allowing them to flourish. I've no doubt that under the principals and the faculty's guidance, this school will continue to serve as a beacon of inspiration for all proud Indians. We all know, all the adults here, that school years are undoubtedly the most formative and influential years of one's life. This evening I was struck by the extent to which various kinds of experiences were seen, displayed at the exhibit, rewarded today. And these are experiences that will be forming and shaping the characters of these young men and women who will go on to lead India. I say and women because I'm told there are 5 girls in the school, so we didn't see them on stage this evening. They're there and they're making their own remarkable contribution. And that's why I was so pleased to hear about the social service work that you do at Sosa and Nathu Kapura. To be here in a place like Scindia School is a privilege. And to reach out to those less privileged is both to acknowledge your advantages and to extend yourself to share those advantages with others. Well done, Scindians. Keep it up. That's really important. To the students here, let me say how important it is that you please continue to focus and develop these areas of interest beyond your schoolwork. Whether it's the student magazines, and I saw them in English and French and German, no doubt there's one in Hindi as well, whether it's the games, the various all-round sports, the choir, the band, the orchestra, all of this. I mean, it's essential that you develop an avocation at this age, because this is what will give meaning and beauty to your life at a later stage as well. It was wonderful to see the students take the lead on several aspects of this magnificent show of talent, and I was particularly struck by that award-winning film about the story writing competition, because I was transported back to my own asthmatic childhood in Bombay, when in my childhood there weren't too many distractions, there were no computers in those days, no television set, even Nintendo wasn't a gleam in an inventor's eye. And so all I had was books, and I used to read them. I mean, I was the eldest child, so I rapidly finished those of my parents' books I could read, and I had no elder sisters or brothers to get books from. And whenever my parents took me off to the library because I read inconveniently fast, I would finish the book in the car on the way home. And so I needed to create my own activity involving words. There was literally nothing else you can do when you're lying in bed and wheezing, unable to sleep and unable to be physically active. And so I started writing. And what was wonderful was that while my writing was simply a way of my dealing with life, and because of the lack of distractions, I was creating my own world as a distraction. What I am grateful for is the way in which my parents encouraged this. My father would get my stories typed up by his secretary so they could be shared with friends and circulated enough. And so by the time I was 10 years old, my first story was published in a daily newspaper. And that, to my mind, was a tribute not to me so much as to the fact that these scribblings of an asthmatic child were taken seriously by my parents and encouraged. And I urge the parents here, those who amongst your children may be tempted to write like the character in the film, but not like the character in the film who stole a story. I hope that the parents will also want to recognize that kind of potential in your children's aspirations. There might be something they do outside the classroom at which they're actually much better than most other people, and which perhaps they're better at than anything they're officially doing at school. Your encouragement at a young age, teachers and parents, can make all the difference to them later in life by giving them the confidence to go on. There are so many talents that are wasted because the child didn't persist, since no one gave the child the faith to believe the talent was worth persisting with. Let's never make that mistake. I'm glad from what I've seen that Scindia School doesn't make that mistake, and let's keep that up at home as well. So seeing the bright young faces I've seen this evening, I'm convinced we are seeing amongst us many stars of India tomorrow. And I must say that I hope that every one of you students here will develop an avocation. And despite what you may have heard about me, believe me, spending time on Facebook or Twitter doesn't count as one. You really have to do something else that you will be able to make something of in your life. Not all children in our country get that opportunity. Not all children even get a decent education. And so it's clear that we have a long way to go to fulfill what Nehruji called this nation's tryst with destiny. The divide in education, the big gap that exists, the class divide, the gender divide, the urban-rural divide, all of these are still wide. And it seems to me that because you are in a position of privilege, you must be all the more conscious of the need to bridge that gap as you go out of here. You can make a difference by changing the mentalities of your own friends and classmates. It's entirely possible that, for example, you can make, as a young student, a difference in your own home when you go home for your vacations. By, for example, seeing if your parents' domestic help can read and write. If they can, great, but can they read and write in both Hindi and English? Since you can, why not teach them the one they can't? Very simple thing. It was the old Swami Vivekananda slogan, and each one teach one. If each one of us in India taught one person, since we are more than 50% literate, we'd solve illiteracy overnight in this country. But do we extend ourselves to do that? We need to make a difference in our communities. I was with Jyotiraditya Scindia today at a Kisan rally about 65, 70 kilometers away from here, down some pretty awful roads, I can tell you, to meet people who are facing some of the most appalling hardships in life. After drought in some cases, hailstorms in other cases, excessive rain paradoxically in other cases, and they are really, really suffering fundamentally. I saw Jyotiraditya reaching out to old people, offering them consolation, encouragement. But the need to recognize that just an hour and a half away from this oasis of privilege, there is real hardship, real want, real suffering, and that we all have a responsibility to not close our eyes to it. That, to my mind, is extremely, extremely important. You know, our society can be transformed if all of us just reached out and touched someone. It is something that is easier to say than to do. To extend yourself, to make that effort, is frankly not that easy, because it means taking yourself away from things that give you more obvious pleasure, perhaps. But believe me, the satisfactions that come from making a difference in the lives of others, in whatever way you can, those satisfactions are unparalleled, unmatched in human existence. We are a very unusual country in many ways. Despite what some people like to say, and we do know there are people who say that nothing has happened in this country for 70 years, I'm sorry to say that they're wrong. There's been enormous change in this country. Just a few years ago, I wrote a book called The Elephant, the Tiger, and the Cell Phone, in which I talked about India as this cliched elephant, you know, large, ponderous beast, covered in dust, covered in flies, slow to move, slow to change, that suddenly, to everyone's surprise, appeared to be acquiring the stripes of a lithe and sinewy Asian tiger. But where does the cell phone come in, you may ask? Well, in many ways. I know that the cell phone is banned in the school during school hours, or in fact during school terms. But it is in many ways an embodiment of the kind of change I'm talking about. When I went off to graduate school in the US, there were about 600 million people in India, and the entire country had just 2 million landline telephones, a figure that didn't improve much till the early 80s. 2 million landline telephones for 600 million people. And the fact is that those 2 million landline telephones obviously could only reach a few people of privilege. So unless you were a very prominent politician or an important journalist or a successful businessman, you might never get a phone. You might just languish on a waiting list, waiting to get one. And members of parliament like Jyotiraditya and myself, but before our time, actually had the privilege of allotting 15 telephone connections to whomever we deemed worthy. That was what a special treat it was to get a phone line. In fact, even if you were lucky enough to get a phone, it wasn't necessarily a blessing, because in many parts of India it didn't work very often. I went to high school in Calcutta, and I still remember the daily experience of walking past the phone in the foyer and lifting up the receiver to see if that day we had a dial tone. And then, if you dialed a number on the days you had a dial tone, you didn't necessarily get the number you dialed. You often heard the words wrong number more often than you heard the words hello. Or you could actually stumble across somebody else's conversation going on in full flow, and they'd be unaware that you were listening in on them. There was even a technical term for this. It was called a cross connection. These were connections that made us very cross. Now, as late as 1984, a member of parliament stood up and criticized this government monopoly for being so useless. And our then Minister of Communications replied in a lordly manner that he had absolutely no obligation in a developing country to provide better communications. Communications, he said, are a luxury in a poor country like ours. And if you, Mr. Member of Parliament, are not satisfied with the telephone service you have, could you please return your instrument, since there is an 8-year-long waiting list for that phone you don't want. Now that was the attitude as recently as 84. Now you fast forward to 2007 when I wrote this book, The Elephant, the Tiger, and the Cell Phone. And I was able to say then that we had just set a new world record for the number of telephone connections established in 1 month. In any 1 month in the entire history of telecommunications. At that point, April 2007, when I was finishing my book, 7 million mobile phones were sold in India. That was a world record. Not even the US or China had come that close. So the manuscript went off to press. It was printed and bound. And by the time the book emerged in the bookstores, that figure was already out of date, because India had broken its own world record several times over, and by December it was 8.3 million. The following year, without the book being reprinted, we crossed 9 million. The following year, 10 million. 3 months in 2010, we actually sold 20 million mobile phones to Indians in this country. In other words, in each of those months, we were selling 10 times as many telephone connections as the entire country had had when I went off to study in graduate school in America. Now, what I wanted to say was, can you imagine what a long way we've come from the days when, if you wanted to call, say, from Bombay to Calcutta, you had to book a trunk call and sit by the phone all day waiting for that ring, because if you didn't pick up the phone when it rang, the operator would pass you by and go on to the next person on the list, and you'd have to wait hours for your trunk call, unless you paid 8 times the going rate for something called a lightning call. But in those days, even lightning used to strike slowly in India, and lightning call took about half an hour instead of the 7 or 8 hours a trunk call might take. Can you imagine how far we've come from there? But that's not just a question of numbers. It's a question of who's carrying those mobile phones. You know, what is absolutely striking today is not just the numbers. We now have 1 billion telephone connections in this country. Jyotiraditya himself was for a short while a minister in the communications ministry. He knows the story. What is far more satisfying is that these connections are held and these phones are carried by people who in the old days would never have presumed to get on those waiting lists that I spoke about. Your chauffeur, your driver who brought you here, undoubtedly is carrying a mobile phone. And it's his own. I'm sure you didn't have to buy it for him. Come to Delhi, to the side streets in any of our suburbs, and you'll find a fellow with a wooden cart that looks like it was designed in the 17th century, on which sits a coal-fired steam iron that looks like it was designed in the 18th century. Bistriwala, of course. And in his pocket he'll be carrying a 21st century instrument, a mobile phone. Because of course most incoming calls are free, and it costs him nothing to get summons from various houses and apartments in the neighborhood telling him to come and pick up a sari or a shirt to iron. What's fascinating about this is how far it's gone. Farmers in the old days, we've just been to a Kisan rally. What would a farmer do at harvest time? In the old days, what he'd have to do is either go himself or send an able-bodied relative, sometimes an 8-10-year-old boy, on a long trudge, 8-10 kilometers in the hot sun to the nearest market town, to find out if the mandi was open that day, to find out whether the crop he'd harvested could be sold, to find out how much price he would fetch, what the competition was. Then that poor boy would walk back 8-10 kilometers in the hot sun, they'd load the cart and go off to the market. All of which today is saved by 1 2-minute phone call. Half a day's back-breaking work gone for a poor farmer. Or a fisherman in my state of Kerala. Today, our fishermen carry telephones with GPS on them. And on that GPS are indications of where the best shoals of fish are, given to them by the state government for free. They catch their fish, and as they come back towards the coast, and once they're near enough to the coast to get the signals, they start dialing all the market terms along the coast to see where they can get the best price for the particular fish they've caught. I was in my constituency of Thiruvananthapuram not too long ago, on a very hot day, when in a farmhouse of a friend, about 20 kilometers away from any place you'd consider urban. And he said, care for some coconut water, which of course we all know is one of the most nutritious things you can drink on a hot day. And I said yes. And he picked out his mobile phone, dialed a number, and a voice said, I'm up here. And right on top of the nearest coconut tree, with his lungi around his knees, a hatchet in one hand and a mobile phone in the other, was the local toddy tapper, who proceeded to bring down a coconut for us to drink. Now that is what really socialism means. It is about how we've used technology to transform the lives of ordinary people, give them hope, give them connectivity, give them opportunity. This is what empowerment is all about. It has happened well before the transformations that have taken place in our country in the last year and a half. But there are some people who need reminding of it, so forgive me for doing so. When you young boys come out of your wonderful school here, remember that there's been this long journey before you. I think wasn't it Charles Darwin who said, whatever his, Isaac Newton, whatever my discoveries are, I walked on the shoulders of giants. We have all walked on the shoulders of giants to get where we have in India. The British left us with 17% literacy. I don't think I said that in my Oxford speech. We're now at 74. It's not good enough because we want to be at 100. But it's a lot better than the 17% that the British left us with. The British left us with 90% of our population below the poverty line. Today we have 23%. That's still too much, but it's better than 90%. We have made progress, and you must take heart from that. We must continue to make progress, and that's where your determination must come in. We've had a number of accomplishments celebrated today. I'm proud of that. I'm delighted to see prizes given for things other than academic distinction. And I say this personally because I was inconveniently good at taking exams, and I kept winning academic prizes, but I wasn't particularly good at sports. And to me, it seems to me that there are qualities perhaps we haven't seen recognized here, which really matter in the school as well, as the teachers and the administrators and the faculty will tell you. Qualities of kindness, of helpfulness, of compassion, of the ability to amuse, the ability to cheer up friends, the ability to just be able to listen sympathetically. These are all abilities that are no shields for, no prizes for, but if you have them as a young student, they will hold you in great stead in adult life. They will transform in many ways the lives of those you meet and touch. The fact is, unfortunately, the Indian educational system, for decades, perhaps for more than a century now, has tended to be seen, and I know this is not true of Scindia, but generally speaking, has tended to be seen as an exercise in cramming children's heads full of facts, making them mug up lessons, making them regurgitate what they're taught from the textbook and what the teacher has told them, right onto the examination paper. But of course, the flaw with that is that such a method produces children with well-filled minds. You don't really need a well-filled mind in the era of Google. All you need is 2 clicks of a mouse to find out what you need to find out. What we really need in the world is not a well-filled mind, but a well-formed mind. A mind that is capable of dealing with unfamiliar facts, with things you haven't read in a textbook, but things that you nonetheless need to grasp, to synthesize, to look at the problems, unfamiliar problems you haven't encountered, and find solutions for them. Because, see, the big examination called life tends to ask you questions you couldn't necessarily always prepare for. Questions that you couldn't guess from seeing last year's exam or the year before's exam, as so many of us have done in the Indian system. We need to inculcate that preparedness for life at a very early age. I'm told Scindia does it, and I'm very glad, because truly, true education is what is left behind in your mind when you've forgotten everything you learned for your examinations. That is what ultimately will see you through in life. It is important to ask the teacher why, but sometimes it's also important to ask why not? Why couldn't this be this way? Why is it? And the teacher must know, and I say this to the teachers here, that saying it's simply like this or it's always been like this is not a good enough answer. You must, as Steve Jobs always used to talk about, how important it was to think out of the box. Well, what is the box? The box is conventional thinking. And in India, part of the box is respect for hierarchy, respect for the teacher, respect for elders, therefore the reluctance to challenge the wisdom that comes down from on high. Now that is not, unfortunately, good enough. Because innovation is what the world is looking for today. Not that we're bad at it. If you Google the words frugal innovation, the first 20 hits you get will all relate to Indian invention. We've done everything from invent the world's cheapest electrocardiogram, the world's cheapest insulin injection, the world's cheapest small car, the Tata Nano, and so on and so forth. But these are all things basically invented by other people that we have stripped down to make them more affordable and more manageable there. We celebrate jugaad, making do, cutting shortcuts and getting things done. But is that good enough? When can we think in terms of once again being a society that can think of what no one has thought before? We used to be a society like that. We are the nation that gave the world the zero. We had scientists and astronomers who actually anticipated Copernicus, Galileo, Newton centuries ago. The theory of gravitation can be found in the Vedas centuries and millennia before the apple fell on Newton's head. Aryabhatta figured out the distance between the Earth and the Sun and the fact that the Earth revolved around the Sun 1,000 years almost before Galileo, Copernicus, Kepler, the whole lot of them. What happened to that quest for originality and for excellence? The only way we can get there again is by encouraging our kids to think beyond conventional wisdom, to think out of the box. Let me give you a mundane example that I happen to be sporting myself today. You know, I need glasses only for a distance. I don't need them to see notes in front of me or to see people near me. I don't need them in conversation. But if I have to see people, well, it's too dark to see them anyway with the light shining in my eyes, but if I had to see people in the back row there, I need to wear glasses. Well, the fact is that because I use them so rarely, less than 5% of the day, I'm constantly breaking them, losing them. They're falling off and getting crushed underfoot. It happened this morning. I'm sort of finding one example after another. In fact, there was one year, 2013, where in the first 3 months of the year, I either lost or broke 6 pairs of glasses. So I was complaining to a friend about this, and he said, why does this keep happening to you? And I said, well, the fact is, for 150 years, glasses have been made in one way. They hang over your ear and they're joined in the middle of your nose, and I find that inconvenient, uncomfortable, unaesthetic, unappealing, so I don't like to wear them except when I actually need to see something at a distance, and because that's the only kind of glasses that exist in the world, and nothing I can do. So he said, wait a minute, I'll find you a solution. And a couple of weeks later, he came back with something that I could just hang around my neck and forget about, which tended not to fall off, not to easily break or get lost or get misplaced. But when I actually needed to use it and see something in the back of the room, all I had to do was click them together with a pair of magnets in the middle. And there I can see all of you, but I can't really without, but there you are. Very simple idea, but it's simply a way of saying we can reimagine what others have always done. And if we can reimagine something as simple as a pair of glasses, think of how many other things the children here who showed us their scientific experiments at the exhibition today, how much more they can reimagine and do differently from what has been done before. I believe it's never too late to learn. I think that all of us, I certainly am no exception, have the capacity to learn something new every single day. It might not necessarily be a fact, it could be a word, it could be an insight into human behavior, it could be a sight we haven't seen, but there can always be something new we can learn to transform. I mean, the mind is like a parachute. It functions best when it's open. Right? Don't try to use a closed parachute or go anywhere with one, except if you're looking for a one-way ticket to upstairs. Same with your mind. Keep it open, use it to learn, and then that learning works if you can just strive to be the best that you can be. You know, winning prizes isn't actually about being better than the next person. In the big prize of life, what's really important is being better than your less good self. It's about fulfilling whatever potential, whatever God-given potential that your divine maker, your parents, your genes, whatever belief system or practice your system has. It's taking what you've got inside you and making the best of it. As I said earlier, it may not be a talent to come first in exams and win these prizes or be outstanding at sports. It might simply be a talent to bring cheer to the people around you. For God's sake, develop that talent. It's invaluable. Because no one can be a better you than you yourself. If you can be the best you that you can be, you've made it. That's the prize that you need in life. So to the children who are going to be graduating this year, let me just say that you're going out into an India that's full of opportunities, far more opportunities than my generation had when we left school, because this is an India where there are so many more possibilities. You can truly live an Indian dream, as it were, our equivalent of what the Americans have long spoken of as an American dream. But that Indian dream is one you better dream with your eyes open, because no one is going to fulfill a dream by staying asleep and dreaming. You have to get out there and do what you need to do. You know, the fact is, people who are accused of being lucky are usually the ones who work the hardest. As somebody once said, the harder I work, the luckier I get. Yes, some people make it look effortless. Jyotiraditya is a very good example. When I think of how much he had to put into that short 10-15-minute speech of his today, and he didn't look at a single note, did he? It was quite remarkable. The quotations, the knowledge, the insights, even the facts about my life that he was able to present to you all. But he made it look so easy. And that means you do the hard work first and it doesn't need to show afterwards when you're out here. The truth is, often what's important is worth taking that trouble for. Luck comes disguised in the dull robes of hard work. But if you work hard, if you develop whatever you have within you, you will succeed. And all I can say there to the young is, don't hesitate to take risks. It's sad that sometimes our system makes children afraid to fail. Well, maybe in class you shouldn't be failing, but in life sometimes setbacks will come your way. Not everyone can be a Jyotiraditya Scindia and go on from triumph to triumph and success to success. Most people in the world who you think have accomplished successes have actually had major setbacks along the way. You may fall, but if you have that faith in yourself, in what you can do, then you know you can rise again. It's not how hard you fall, it's how bravely you pick yourself up that matters. It sounds like a cliche, but it's true. I've been there. I think if anyone tells you they've never had a setback in their life, they're either blind to some of the real setbacks they've allowed themselves to forget, or there's one waiting for them around the corner. The truth is, everybody has failures and disappointments. Don't be afraid to risk them. It's when you're young that you can risk them all the more, because the young have fewer responsibilities, burdens, and worries. They can take the chances. Now, Bill Gates dropped out of a place like Harvard, sat in a garage and tinkered with software, and now he's the richest person in the world. He still doesn't have a college degree, except what has been given to him honorarily afterwards by various grateful universities that use what he has produced. So let me just say, I want to wrap up here. You folks, you youngsters here, are already the majority in our country, because more than 50% of our population is under 25. So the parents here, I'm afraid, we're already in a minority. India belongs to you, youngsters. You have to go on and make something of it. But in doing that, what should you pursue? I'm going to end with a story too. But it's a story that I didn't write, even though I've written it, but it wasn't my own invention. It is an ancient story from our Puranas. It's a story, a typical Puranic story, about a young warrior who wants to marry a beautiful princess. So he goes to the princess's father, the king, and asks for her hand. The king thinks this warrior is a bit too cocksure and callow. So he says, "You may marry my daughter when you find truth." Well, the warrior leaps on his steed and he canters off in a quest for truth. He goes to mountaintops where sages have hidden themselves. He goes to monasteries where sages are meditating. He goes to forests where people are scourging themselves with penitential bark. He goes everywhere where people are looking for the truth, but nowhere does he find truth. Despairing one day and seeking refuge from a thunderstorm, he finds himself seeking shelter in a dank and musty cave. There in the darkness, he sees an old hag, a wizened old lady with matted hair, wrinkles on her face, bony limbs, rotting teeth, bad breath, gloomy eyes. But she approaches him and says, "What are you looking for?" And he says, "I'm looking for truth." And they start talking. And they keep talking. They talk all night. And as they talk, and the more they talk, the warrior realizes he has come to the end of his quest. She is truth. When dawn breaks, the storm is over, the warrior decides to return to the palace to claim his bride. As he leaps on his horse, he turns to the wizened old crone and says, "What shall I tell them at the palace about you?" And the old hag smiles and says, tell them, she says, "tell them I'm young and beautiful." And that really is a 2,000-year-old story. Truth is not always true, even though truth exists. Which means you have to search for your own truth. I hope you will find it. When you find it, keep a little percentage of doubt that the truth you have found may not be the truth after all. We are currently ruled by a few people who believe they have the truth, and many of us don't think they do. Let us understand that as long as you bring the best of yourself to the quest for truth, then India will be able to rejoice in your story of success. Think out of the box, think creatively, continue to be talented and enthusiastic as the Scindia school has encouraged you to be. Also be kind and loving and compassionate, humanitarian, doing that kind of social service work after school as well. Do all of those things. And let me say to all of you, the future is yours. India needs you. Thank you, Jyotiraditya and the school, for this opportunity to speak to the children here. Be proud of what you've already accomplished. Be optimistic about what you will accomplish. And I hope you will make all of us guests present here today swell with pride when we hear about you in years to come and we recall that we saw you at this school on this Founders Day 2015. India needs you. Make it a better place. Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir. Now, ladies and gentlemen, is the time for the much-awaited conversation, which will be conducted by none other than our very own member of faculty, Mr. Vishesh Sahai, a teacher much loved for his progressive views and New Age philosophy, and one who dons multiple hats, most notably as the editor of the school newsletter. He will be assisted by the boys of the school audio squad.